Hey folks, in this episode I'm going to show you how to make this title sequence for a non-fiction TV drama called I Spy. So the main focus of this tutorial is to teach you how to make this mechanical shutter. I'll keep the scene simple, this project shouldn't get too complicated, so without further ado, let's get to it. Open up Blender, select all the objects in your scene and hit delete. I'm in layout view up here, by the way, and I've also got my timeline open down here. If you don't know how to open your timeline, just take your cursor to the bottom left until you see a crosshair, and then left click and drag up, and then change that window from 3D viewport to timeline. I've already got mine open, so I'm just going to take my cursor to the bottom left of the 3D viewport. I'll left click and drag down and collapse that window. I'll navigate to Edit, Preferences, and under Add-ons, you're going to search for Node, and then enable the Node Wrangler here. Once you've enabled that, click this button and click Save Preferences. And that will ensure the Node Wrangler loads every time you load Blender. I'll navigate to my Output tab over here, and I'll change my frame rate to 30 FPS. If this was for TV or a movie, you'd probably go with a frame rate of 24 to 25 FPS, but because I'm uploading to YouTube, I'm just going to keep this at 30 FPS. I'll also enable Render Region over here. I'll then navigate to the Render tab over here. I'm going to change this from Eevee to Cycles. You can keep it at Eevee if you like. I'll also change my device type from CPU to GPU. So in my 3D viewport, I'm going to hit Shift A, I'm going to go Mesh, and I'm going to choose Circle. I'll navigate to the circle settings down here. I'll expand those options, and I'm just going to ensure that I've got 32 vertices. Excellent. I'll just collapse this window. I'll then hit Numpad 7 to go into top view, Numpad period to zoom into the selected object. I'll then click Tab to go into edit mode. I'll hit number 1 for vertices select. I'll then hit E to extrude, S to scale, hold down Control to scale it in increments, and I'm going to bring it into, let's say, maybe around about there perhaps. 3 to go into face select. I'll select this face. I'll then hold down Control, Shift, and left click select this face. So we've got these faces selected. I'll then hit Shift D to duplicate. I'll hit Escape to snap that back into position. I'll then hit P to separate, and I'm going to choose Separate by Selection. I'll then tab out of edit mode. Select that piece, which is here. Tab into edit mode. I'm going to hit number 2 for edge select. So up here, we've got vertice, edge, and face select. Alternatively, you can hit 1, 2, or 3. So I'm going to go into edge select. I'll select this edge here. I'm going to hit Shift S, and I'll choose cursor to selected. Tab out of edit mode. I'll then navigate to the object menu up here, and I'll choose set origin, and we'll choose origin to 3D cursor. I'll just hit Shift C, and that will recenter my cursor to the center of the world. So now if I hit R, you can see that the origin is where we place the cursor. Excellent. I'm going to navigate to my viewport shading options up here. I'll click this button, and I'm going to choose random. I'll then navigate to the outliner, and I'm going to hide the original circle from the viewport. I'm going to navigate to my transform pivot point up here, and I'm going to choose 3D cursor. For this mechanical shutter, we're going to want 8 flaps altogether, and we'll want to rotate them equally over 360 degrees. If you didn't know, Blender is a calculator, so I'm going to take my cursor down here to the current frame. I'm going to type in 360 divide by 8, which should give us 45 degrees. With this object selected, I'm going to hit Alt D, and that will create an instance. I'll then hit RZ45 and then hit enter. I'll then hit Alt B. I'll escape that into its original position. I'll then hit RZ45, hit enter. And I'm going to keep doing this until we've got 8 flaps. Excellent. So now if I was to select all the flaps, I'll then change my pivot point to individual origins. If I was to hit R, you can see that we're getting this shutter effect. Excellent. So I want to be able to control this with an empty object. So I'm going to hit Shift A, and I'm going to choose empty, and I'm going to choose a sphere. I'm just going to scale down the sphere so it's easier to manage. So I'm going to hit S, hold down Control to snap it in increments, and I'll take it down to around about there. I'll then navigate to my outliner and select the first flap. I'll navigate to my Constraints tab down here. I'm going to click Add Restraint, and we'll choose Copy Rotation. For the target object, we're going to use that empty. The mix type, we're going to change it to add, and for the owner, we're going to change it from world space to local. So now, if I select this empty object and I hit R, you can see that the flap is following the rotation of the empty object. So I'm going to do the same for circle.002. Click add constraint, we'll go to copy rotation, we'll choose the target object, which is the empty. We're going to change it from replace to add, and we'll change the owner from world space to local space. I'll demonstrate that one more time. So select the next flap, we'll go to add constraints, copy rotation, target will be the empty, the mix type will be add, and we'll change the owner from world space to local space. So I'm going to do that for all of these flaps, and I'll be right back. So now that you've done that, you should be able to select your empty object and hit R, and all the flaps should move with your empty object. Excellent. So if I go to my object data tab over here, and with my empty object selected, we should be able to change the Z rotation up to 45 degrees. So I'll just type in 45. So a problem that we're going to have is all of these flaps are on the same Z location, so it's going to cause artifacts in the render, as you can see here. That's an easy enough fix. I'll navigate to my object data tab over here, and with the empty object selected, I'm going to set the Z rotation to 0. I'll then select circle.001, which is our first flap. I'll then hit Shift S and we'll choose cursor to selected. I'll hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'll ensure that my pivot point is on 3D cursor. I'll then tab into edit mode. I'm going to select all the vertices. I'll then hit R to rotate, hold down Control and Shift to snap it in fine increments. And I'm just going to snap it up 1 increment there. Excellent. So I'll tab out of edit mode. I'm going to hit numpad 7 to go into top view. I'm going to select the empty object and I'm going to set the Z rotation on the empty object to 44 degrees. We're still going to have some problems with these flaps overlapping each other. So I'm going to navigate to my outliner and select the circle.001. I'll then tab into edit mode. I'm going to hit 1 to go into vertice select. I'll then select this top vertice here. I'll then hit O to go into proportional editing, or you can just click this button up here and just ensure that you've got smooth set as your interpolation type. I'll then orbit round till I've got a different view, something around there perhaps. I'll then change my pivot point from 3D cursor to individual origins. I'll then hit G, Z. I'm going to bring in my proportional editing to around about there. I'm going to hold down Shift and I'm just going to drag this up ever so slightly to around about there perhaps, just so there's a bit of separation. Excellent. I'll then tab out of edit mode. I'm going to hit numpad 7 to go into top view. Okay, it's coming together. So now if I go to my outliner and select my empty object and change the Z rotation, make sure that everything works. Okay, it's looking quite good. So with the empty object selected, I'm going to set my Z rotation to 0. I'm now going to go to my constraints tab over here. I'll then click add constraint and we'll choose limit rotation. So I'm going to limit the X and Y to 0. And I'm going to limit the Z value to a maximum of, let's say, 44 degrees. So now in my 3D viewport, I'll just orbit round, and with the empty object selected, I'll hit R. You can see that the rotation is limited to the Z axis between 0 and 45 degrees. Excellent. I'll hit numpad 7 to go into top view. I'll go to my outliner and I'm going to unhide the original circle object. I'm going to select that circle object. Maybe I'll go into X-ray view up here and I'll tab into edit mode. I'll then hold down Shift and out and I'm going to right click select this edge loop around here. I'll then disable proportional editing by hitting O. I'm going to scroll out, I'll hit S, hold down Control to snap it to the grid, and I'm just going to bring it out to, let's say, around about there perhaps. Tab out of edit mode. I'll just disable X-ray view. I need to give this a bit of thickness now, so I'm going to go to my modifier tab over here. I'm going to click add modifier. We'll go to generate and I'm going to choose solidify. I'll just hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'm going to increase the solidification to, let's say, 0.05. Let's see what that looks like. Okay. I'll then go to wireframe view, and on the solidify modifier, I'm going to choose even thickness, and for the offset, I'm going to increase this value until all the flaps are in the center of the solidification, so around about there perhaps. I'm going to go back into solid view. The edges are a bit jaggedy, so I want to add a subdivision surface, so I'm going to go add modifier, I'm going to go generate, and I'll choose subdivision surface. The reason this is coming through is because obviously we haven't got enough geometry to hold the edge loops, so I'm going to tab into edit mode. I'm going to go to X-ray view. I'll then hit Control R to add a loop cut. I'll click that into place. I'll then right click. I'll then hit Control B to bevel that. And I'm just going to bring this out to round about there, just so there's a bit of space on the inside. Excellent. So now if I tab out of edit mode, I'll then toggle out of X-ray view. You can see that the faces are no longer protruding through. I'll then navigate to my modifier stack and I'm going to apply the solidify modifier. I'll then tab into edit mode. And on this inner face loop here, I'm going to hit Control R to add another edge loop. I'll click that into place. Maybe I'll go to X-ray view. I'm going to hit Control B to bevel that. And I'm going to bring this up to, let's say, around about there. I'm going to hit number 2 to go into edge select. I'm going to select this edge, hold down Shift out and left click select this edge loop here. I'll do the same for this edge loop. I'll then hit S, Shift Z, and that will scale it down on all axes excluding the Z axes. And I'll just bring this in to around about here just because I want a tighter edge around here. And I think I'll do the same for the outer edges. I'll select this edge. I'm going to hold down Shift out and left click select this edge loop. And I'll do the same for underneath. Hold down Shift, out, left click select this edge loop. I'll then hit F, Shift Z, and that will scale it on all axes, excluding the Z axis. And I'll just bring this out to around about there. And also I'm going to add 2 more cuts here. Control R to add a cut there. Control B to bevel that cut, and I'll bring it out to, let's say, around about there perhaps. I'll then tab out of edit mode. I'll also exit out of X-ray view. I'll hit numpad 7 to go into top view. I'll then hit Shift C to center my cursor. I'm going to ensure that my pivot point is set to median point. Navigate to my outliner. I'm going to select my empty object. I'm going to go to the object data tab, and I'll set the Z rotation to, let's say, 22 degrees. Okay, I've made a bit of a rookie mistake here, so I'm going to hit numpad 7. As you can see, all the flaps are the wrong way round. So I'll navigate to my outliner. I'm going to select this bottom circle. I'll then hold down Control, hold down Shift, and select this top one. So we've got all 8 flaps selected. I'll just orbit round in my 3D viewport. I'll then hit S, Z, 1, minus, and then hit Enter. I'll just hit numpad 7 to go into top view. And as you can see, they're all the right way round. Excellent. I'm just going to select my empty object again. I'll then hit R just to check that it's all working nicely. Okay, we've got a bit of a problem here, so I'm just going to hit escape. And to solve that, I'm going to select this original circle object here. I'll then tab into edit mode. I'll navigate up to the top right, and I'll enable wireframe view. Just make sure that you've got X-ray view enabled. I'll then hit 1 to go into vertices select, and I'm going to box select all of these vertices here. I'll hit S to scale. I'll hold down Shift and Z, and that will scale down on all axes, excluding the Z axis. I'll then hold down Control to snap it in increments, and I'll bring it in 2 increments, around about there. Tab out of edit mode. I'll just go back to solid view. I'll select my empty object. I'll hit R to rotate, and it's still not working as I want, so I'm just going to click it in place there. I'll navigate to my outliner, and I'm going to select the first flap, which is circle.001. I'll then enable X-ray view. I'm going to tab into edit mode. Let me think. I think it's this vertex here that we'll need to select. I'll then toggle off X-ray view, and with your proportional editing enabled up here, I'll hit G, Z. I'm going to hold down Shift to grab it in finer increments, and I'm just going to bring it down to round about there. Okay, that's looking a lot better. I'll now tab out of edit mode. I'm going to select my empty object. I'm going to go to my 3D viewport, hit numpad 7 to go into top view. I'll just hit R, and I'm just going to make sure that this is working okay. Okay, it's working a lot better. Down here, we've still got some issues, so I'm going to go to my outliner. I'm going to select circle.001, which is the first flap. I'll then enable X-ray view. I'm going to tab into edit mode. Maybe I'll select this vertex here. I'll then disable X-ray view up here. I'm just going to orbit round in my 3D viewport, and with proportional editing still enabled, I'll hit G, Z. I'm going to hold down Shift and just drag it down ever so slightly. Okay, that's fixed that problem. Excellent. I'll tab out of edit mode. I'm going to select my empty object. I'll hit numpad 7 to go into top view. I'll just hit R to rotate. Just make sure everything's working as it should. Okay, excellent. So with your empty controller selected, I'm going to go to Object Data tab over here, and for the Z rotation, I'm going to type in 0 degrees. We're now at the text object, so I hit Shift A. I'm going to go to Text. I'll then navigate to the Text Data tab down here. I'm going to change the alignment from horizontal to center, and the vertical from top baseline to middle. I'll then hit S, hold down Control to scale it in increments. I'm going to tab into edit mode. I'll delete this text, and I'll type in I Spy. I'll then navigate to my Text Data tab over here, and under font, I'm going to change the font to something a bit more appropriate. So I'm going to click this folder here, and that should take you to your font folder. I'm going to choose this font here. It's called Courier New Bold. I don't know if this is included with Windows, but you should be able to download free fonts from the intraweb. So select your font and then click Open Font. I'll then go back to my Text Data tab down here. I'm going to scroll down until I see spacing, and I'm going to reduce the line spacing to, let's say, 0.4. I'm going to hit S to scale up. I'll hold down Control to scale it in increments, and I'm going to take it to round about there. I'll then go back to the Text Data tab over here, and under Geometry, I'm going to expand these options. I'm going to increase the bevel depth to 0.01, and I'm going to increase the extrusion to, let's say, maybe 0.1. That's a bit too much, so 0.025. I'm going to hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'll then hit G, Z. I'm going to hold down Control to grab it in increments, and I'm going to bring it down to round about there. Hit numpad 7 to go into top view. I want the text to be center to this origin point here, so I'm just going to hit G, Y, hold down Control, hold down Shift, and I'm going to bring it down to, let's say, around about there. Okay, excellent. I'll navigate to my outliner, and I'm going to rename that object to text I spy. I'll then hit Shift D to duplicate that object. I'm going to hit Escape to snap it back in its original position. And on my outliner, I'm going to mute the text I spy object from the 3D viewport. I'll then select the new text I spy.001. I'll then tab into edit mode. I'm going to delete that text and I'm going to replace it with episode 1. I'll hit S just to scale that down. I'm going to zoom in, and again I'm going to hit G, Y, hold down Control and Shift to snap it in fine increments, and I'm just going to bring it up to, let's say, around about there perhaps. In fact, I want to line this up with the I Spy text, so I'm going to go to my outliner and unhide the I Spy text, and with the episode 1 text selected, navigate to your text settings over here, scroll down until you see spacings, and we're going to increase the line spacing. Okay, that's pretty close. Maybe I can hit G, Y, hold down Control, Shift, and we'll just drag it down to round about there perhaps. Excellent. So you should have 2 text objects now. So go to your outliner. I'm going to mute this one. I'll then hit Shift A. I'm going to go Mesh, and I'm going to choose Plane. I'm going to zoom out. I'll then hit S for scale, and we'll scale it by 5. And then hit Enter. I'll hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to hit G, Z, hold down Control to snap it in increments, and I'm going to bring it down to there, just so there's a slight gap between this plane and the I Spy text. I'll hit numpad 7 to go into top view. Before we move on, it's a good idea to save your project. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, and I'm going to save my project as Like and Subscribe. Thanks folks, you absolute legends. And then click Save As. I think it's time to add a light in our scene now. So hit Shift A and we go to Light and we'll choose Area. I'm going to hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'll then hit G, Z, hold down Control to snap it in increments, and I'm going to bring it up to, let's say, around about there perhaps. I'm going to change this area light from square to disc. Maybe I'll set the size to, let's say, 2.5 meters. I think we should add a camera in our scene as well, so I'm going to hit numpad 7, numpad period. We hit Shift A and select camera. Go to your outliner and ensure that you've got the camera enabled there. And under your camera data settings over here, I'm going to change the focal length to, let's say, 24 millimeters. I'm going to go to the object data settings over here. Ensure that the X and Y location is set to 0 and the X, Y and Z rotation is also set to 0. I'll then hit numpad 0 to go into camera view. We'll then go to your Z location under your object transform, and we'll increase this to, let's say, 1.5 meters. You may need to increase or decrease this to suit your scene, but 1.5 meters for me seems to be a good median point. I'll then navigate to the world data tab over here. I'm going to change strength to 0. I'll then navigate into rendered view. I'll then go to my outliner. I'm going to select my area light. I'm going to go to my light data settings over here, and I'm going to increase the power to, let's say, 50 watts. That should do for now. I'm going to take my cursor to the bottom left of the 3D viewport until I see a crosshair. I'm going to left click and drag up and open up a new window. We'll change this from the 3D viewport to the shader editor. I'll select the original object, which is this object here. I hit numpad 0 to go into camera view. I'll then navigate to my material tab over here. I'll then click this button and select the default material. If you haven't got one, just click new. I'll then go to my shader editor. I'm going to hit N to hide the N panel. I'm going to zoom in. Maybe I can make this window a bit bigger. I'm going to change the base color from white to black. I think I'll increase the roughness to 1. Maybe I can increase the value on the base color to, let's say, 0.01. I'll then navigate to my outliner and select circle.001, which is the first flap. I'll then hold down Control, hold down Shift, and then select the last circle, which is circle.008. I'll then go to my shader editor. I'm going to click New, and we'll rename this material to Flaps. I'm going to change the material to metallic. I'll change the base color to black. Navigate to your 3D viewport, hit Ctrl L, and select Link Materials. I want to be able to preview those materials, and the flaps are open at the moment, so I'm going to go to my empty object here. I'm going to go to my object data, and I'm going to rotate it on the z-axis by, let's say, 20-30 degrees. I'll then select one of those flaps. I'll then increase the base color to something viewable, maybe something around there. And maybe I can select the first flap, hold down Control, hold down Shift, and then select the last flap. I'm going to right click and choose Set Auto Smooth. Okay, excellent. So I'm going to select this original object here, and I'll rename the material to black. I'll just navigate into viewport shading over here, orbit out of here. I'm going to select this outer plane here, so the one behind the text. I'll go to my shader editor, I'll click this button, and I'm going to choose black. I'll then hit numpad 0 to go into front view. I'm going to select my empty object. I'm going to go to my object data tab down here, and I'll set the Z rotation to 0. I now select my text, the I Spy text, and in the shader editor, click New. I'm going to rename this material to Text. I want this material to be metallic. Also want it to have some roughness, so I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to go Texture, and I'm going to choose Noise Texture. I'm going to set the detail to, let's say, 5. I'm going to set it to 4D. And with the noise texture selected and with your node wrangler enabled, I'm going to hit Control T, and that just adds a texture coordinate node and a mapping node. I'll then change the coordinates from generated to object. I'll just box select these nodes here. I hit G, just drag them across. I'll then hit Shift A. I'm going to go Converter, and I'll choose Color Ramp, and I'll pop that here. I'm going to plug the factor from this noise texture into the factor of the color ramp, and the color from the color ramp into the roughness factor of the principal BSDF. I'll just orbit round in my 3D viewport. I'll hit numpad period, and that will zoom into the active object. And on the color ramp, I'm just going to drag these flags a bit closer to each other so we can see what's happening. Okay, maybe I can increase the scale to, let's say, 8. I'll also increase the roughness to 0.75. On your color ramp, I'm going to change the interpolation type from linear to ease. And with your white flag selected in your color ramp, I'm going to click the color swatch, and I'm going to decrease the value to, let's say, around about 0.5. I'll then select the black flag. I'll then go to the color swatch, and I'll increase the value to, let's say, around about 0.2. I'll then drag this flag all the way across, and I'll drag this flag all the way across. Just so it's subtle. Maybe we can increase these flags slightly. So maybe I'll set this flag's position to 0.1, and I'll select this flag and set the position to 0.9. So I want to give this text a bit of bump as well. So I'm going to take this noise texture here, I'm going to hit Control Shift D, and that will duplicate that node whilst maintaining the connection to the previous node. I'll hit Shift A, I'm going to go Vector, and we'll choose Bump, and I'll pop that there. I'm going to take the factor from this noise texture and plug it into the height of the bump node, and I'll plug the normal socket into the normal socket of the principal BSDF. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to increase the scale to, let's say, 250. Maybe I'll increase the distortion to 1, and I'll bring the strength down to, let's say, 0.025. Maybe we can increase that slightly. So I'm going to bring the strength up to 0.15. Okay, it's subtle, but it will make a difference. I want the edges of this text to glow. To do that, I'm going to utilize this emission socket here. So I'll hit Shift A, we go to Input, and we'll choose Layer Weight. Shift A, we go Converter, and we choose Math. I'm going to set the math to multiply. With this layer weight mask, we're going to take this Fresnel value and plug it into the strength of the emission on the principal BSDF. I'll just orbit round so we can see what we're doing here. I'll then change the blend to, let's say, 0.1. To increase the strength, we pop this multiply node in between the layer weight and the principal BSDF, and then we can change this value here. So I'm going to set this to, let's say, 20. I'll just hit numpad 0 to go into camera view. I'm going to go into rendered view. I'll then go to my outliner, and I'm going to mute the area light from the 3D viewport. Maybe I can disable the overlays. I'll just navigate to the shader editor, and I'm going to increase this multiply value to 25. So that will give us a strength of 25. So this area light, we're going to use this as a flash. So for now, I'm just going to mute this from the 3D viewport, and we're going to add some other lighting to the scene. I'll re-enable my overlays. I'll then enable viewport shading. I'm going to hit Shift A, I'm going to go Light, and I'll choose Point. I'll hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'll hit G, Z, hold down Control to snap it to the grid, and I'm going to bring it up to, let's say, around about there perhaps. I'll then hit numpad 7 to go into top view. I'll hit G, Y, hold down Control to snap it in increments, and I'm going to bring it up to, let's say, around about there. In fact, maybe I'll just go to my Object Data tab over here, and I'll bring it on the Y-axis by 1 meter. I'll then hit numpad 0 to go into camera view. I'm going to go into rendered view, and with that point light selected, I'm going to go to my light data tab down here. I'm going to increase the strength to, let's say, 1000 watts. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, that's a bit strong. So maybe we can reduce that to, let's say, 500 watts. I'll then increase the radius to, let's say, 1 meter. That will give us softer shadows. It's still a bit bright, so I'm going to tone this down to, let's say, 250 watts. Okay, that's a bit better. Now we need to duplicate this light. Let's just give us a bit more room. I'll hit Shift D to duplicate. I'll hit Escape to snap it back into its original position. I'll then navigate to my Object Data tab over here. And for the Transform Y location, I'm going to set this to -1. So with this lamp selected, I'm going to go to my light data tab over here. I'm going to set this to like an orange colour, maybe something around there perhaps. I'll then go to my outliner and select the original point light, and I'm going to change this colour to maybe kind of like a teal colour, something around there. They're complementary colours, so that should work absolutely fine. I'm still not happy with this text material. There's too much emission coming from the top faces, so maybe we can reduce that. So with the text selected, I'm going to increase this window to the shader editor, and maybe I can set the blend type to, let's say, 0.05, maybe 0.025. I'll then go to my outliner. I'm just going to mute both of the point lights. I'll then mute the overlays. Okay, I like the look of that. I'll re-enable my overlays. I'm going to enable the 2 point lights. Maybe I can reduce the size of these point lights, so I'll select point light number 1, and I'll decrease the radius to 0.5. I'll then select the second point light, and I'll also reduce the radius to, let's say, 0.5. And I think maybe we can reduce the overall strength, so I'm going to set the power to 150 watts, maybe 100 watts. Okay, that looks good. I'll select the blue light, and I'll set the power to 100 watts. I'll then navigate to my outliner. I'm going to mute the text iSpy from the viewport, and I'll unhide the text iSpy.001 from the viewport. I'll navigate to the shader editor. I'll click this button here, and I'll give it the same text material. And also, in your outliner, we can rename this object to text episode 1. I'll then hide that from the 3D viewport. I'll re-enable the text iSpy object. I'll then navigate to viewport shading. I'll click this button here, and I'll enable scene lights and scene world. So now all the lights in our scene should match up with the 3D viewport. Excellent. I'm going to hit Control S to save the project. Next up, we're going to be animating this scene. So navigate to your shader editor. Click this button here and change it from the shader editor to the graph editor. The first thing we should animate will be the mechanical shutter. So I'm going to navigate to my outliner over here. I'm going to select this empty object. I'll now set the Z rotation on the empty object to 44 degrees. I'll ensure that I'm on frame 1 by skipping back on my timeline. I'll then add a keyframe here. I'll then set the current frame on my timeline to 10. I'll go back to the Z rotation and add another keyframe there. I'll then skip to frame 20. So that's 10 frames later. I'll go back to my Z rotation, and I'm going to type in 0 for 0 degrees and add another keyframe there. I'm going to take my cursor over to my graph editor. I'm going to hit A to select all the keyframes. As you can see, the keyframes are set to Bezier. I don't want that. I want a constant speed. So over my graph editor, I'm going to hit T, and then I'm going to choose linear. I'll now skip to frame 25. I'll then set the Z rotation to 44 degrees. I'll add a keyframe there. I'll then skip my timeline to frame 30. So that's another 5 frames. And I'll change the Z rotation to 0 degrees. I'll add another keyframe. I'll then skip to frame 50. And with the Z rotation set to 0, I'll add a keyframe there. I'll then skip to frame 55. I'll change the Z rotation to 44 degrees. And add another keyframe there. Skip to frame 65, which is 10 frames later. And I'll change the Z rotation to 0. I'll add a keyframe there. Okay, I've accidentally added that keyframe on frame 64, so I'm just going to zoom in onto my graph editor. I'm going to box select that keyframe. I'll hit G, X, and I'm going to drag it across to frame 65. Skip to the next keyframe. Yep, that's on frame 65. Excellent. I'll then skip forward 5 more frames, so that's frame 70. I'll then change the Z rotation to 44 degrees and add a keyframe there. I'll then skip 5 more frames to frame 75. I'll change the Z rotation to 0, add a keyframe there. I'll then skip 20 frames, so I'm going to go to frame 95. And for the Z rotation, I'm going to keep that at 0 and add a keyframe there. I'll then skip forward 5 frames to frame 100. And for my Z rotation, I'm going to set this to 44 degrees and I'll add a keyframe there. I'll change my timeline end frame to, let's say, frame 110. I'll then skip back to frame 1. I'm just going to hit play. So let me just explain what's going to happen. Is the shutter's going to open. We're going to have a camera flash. It's going to close. We're going to have another camera flash with the word I Spy appearing. And when it closes this time and then opens, we're going to replace this I Spy text with the episode 1 text. So on frame 1, I'm going to mute the text episode 1 object and unmute the text I Spy object. I'll select that object, and under your object data tab down here, under visibility, we'll expand these options. And on frame 1, with the viewports and renders enabled, we're going to add keyframes here. I'll then select the empty object in my outliner. I'll then skip to frame 54. I'll reselect the text I Spy object. I'll navigate down to my object data tab down here. I'll add a keyframe for show in viewports and renders. I'll then skip forward one more frame to frame 55, and we'll disable viewports and disable renders, and we'll add keyframes here. I'll then navigate to my outliner. I'll enable the text episode 1 object. I'll select that object. I'll navigate to my object data tab down here. I'm going to skip forward one more frame, so we're on frame 56. Enable viewports and renders for the visibility, and we'll add a keyframe here and a keyframe here. I'm going to skip back one frame, so we're on frame 55. I'll then disable viewports and disable renders, and I'll add keyframes here. So now if I skip back to frame 1 and hit play, you should see that the text will change. So now we just need to ensure that our area light will flash in time with the shutter. So navigate to your outliner, scroll up, enable your area light up here, and select the area light. In fact, we're going to select the empty object. Now if we scrub the timeline, we can see where we want the flash to appear. So we want it to appear around frame 20. Maybe I'll set it to 0 at frame 17. So with your area light selected, I'm going to go to your light data tab down here. We're going to set the power to 0, and we'll add a keyframe here. I'll then skip forward one more frame, so I'm on frame 18, and I'll set the power to, let's say, 100 watts. I'll then add a keyframe here. I'm just going to go into rendered view just to ensure that the 100 watts is enough. I'll just skip back one more frame. Okay, that seems bright enough. I'll then skip to frame 20, maybe frame 21, and I'm going to reduce the power to 0. I'll add a keyframe there. Maybe we can do this in viewport shading up here. I'm going to select my empty object. I'm going to scrub my timeline until I'm on frame 30. I'll then skip back 2 frames, so we're on frame 28. I'm going to select my area light. I'm going to add a keyframe with the power set to 0. I'm going to skip forward 1 frame. I'm going to set the power to 100. I'll add a keyframe there. I'll then skip forward 3 frames, so we're on frame 32, and I'll set the power to 0. I'll then add a keyframe there. Let's just check that. So I'm going to skip back to the first frame. I'll turn my overlays off. I'll hit play. Excellent. I'll just re-enable my overlays. I'm going to select my empty object. So the next camera flash will appear when the shutter opens here. So I'm just going to go into solid view just so I can see what I'm doing a bit better. So I want the flash to be off on frame 62. So I'll select my area light, and with the power set to 0, I'll add a keyframe. I'm going to skip forward 1 frame, so we're on frame 63. I'll set the power to 100. I'll add a keyframe. I'm going to skip forward 3 more frames, and I'll set the power to 0. I'll add a keyframe here. The next one, so I'll select my empty object. I'll scrub the timeline until the shutter opens, so it's fully open on frame 75. I'm going to skip back to frame, let's say, 73. I'll select my area light. With the power set to 0, I'll add a keyframe. I'm going to skip forward 1 frame. I'll set the power to 100. I'll add another keyframe. I'll skip forward 3 more frames, and I'll set the power to 0. We'll add a keyframe here. Okay, that's the flash animated. So I'm going to go to viewport shading up here. I'm going to disable my overlays temporarily. I'm going to skip back to frame 1. I'll hit play. I'm going to hit Ctrl S to save. I'll then select my empty object. I'll re-enable my overlays. I think I want to add one more feature to this. So when the shutter opens for the first time and the camera flash goes off, I want to animate the depth of field. So this goes out of focus here, and then it'll pull focus. So it'll be in focus here. And the same for this one. It'll be out of focus here, and then it will regain focus here. That should be easy enough. So I need to calculate the distance between the camera and the text object. So I'm going to hit numpad 1. I'll just go into solid view. I'll select my camera. I'm going to go to my object data over here, and we can see that the camera is elevated by 1.5 meters, but the text is slightly lower. So maybe if I select my camera, I'm going to go to my camera settings over here. We'll go to viewport display, and I'll select limits, and this will give us our focal point. I'll then enable depth of field. Our focal point is down here at the minute, so I'm going to reduce the focal distance to 1.5 just for the minute. I'll then zoom in. I'll then scrub the focal distance while holding down shift until the focal plane is in line with the text object. So maybe I can give this an all-round number of, let's say, 1.55. So we'll remember this figure here. I'll just go into camera view. I'm going to go into rendered view, and on the camera settings under depth of field, I'm also going to increase the blades to 16. Maybe I'll decrease my f-stop to, let's say, 0.3. That will give us quite a heavy depth of field. I'll then select the empty object, just so I can see where we are on our timeline. So I want it to be out of focus here, and I want it to be out of focus here. Everywhere else will be in focus. So I'll select frame 20. I'm going to skip back 5 frames to frame 15. I'll then select my camera. And under depth of field, I'm going to add a keyframe under the focal distance. I'll then select my empty object, skip to frame 25. I'll then reselect my camera. And for the focal distance, I'll add another keyframe set to 1.55. I'll select my empty object. The next point is going to be out of focus, will be on frame 65. So I'm going to skip back 5 frames, which will be frame 60. I'll select my camera. And for the focal distance, set to 1.55 meters, I'll add another keyframe there. I'll then select my empty, going to be out of focus here, and then it will refocus here. So on frame 70, I'll select my camera. I'll add another keyframe for the focal distance set to 1.55 meters. I'll then reselect my empty object, and then on frame 20, I'll select my camera, and I'm going to adjust the focal distance now to, let's say, 1 meter. I'll then add a keyframe there. I'll select my empty object. I'll then go to frame 65, where I want it to be out of focus again. I'll then select my camera, and I'll set the focal distance to 1 meter. I'll then add a keyframe there. Let's just go into viewport shading. I'm going to skip back to frame 1. I'm going to hit play. I'm just going to go into viewport rendering. We can go to the camera settings under depth of field, and by reducing the f-stop will give you a deeper depth of field, and the higher the f-stop will give you a shallower depth of field. I'm going to set my f-stop to, let's say, 0.7, maybe 0.5. So I'm just going to skip to, let's say, frame 35. I'm going to go to viewport shading. I'll go to my render settings over here. I'm going to keep the noise threshold set to 0.01. If you want to speed up your render times, set this to a higher number, so like 0.025 or 0.05. I'll decrease my max samples to 1024. I might go higher for my final render because depth of field requires quite high samples. I'm going to go to lights. I'll disable light tree. I'm going to go to light paths. I'll expand these options here. I'll disable reflective and refractive caustics. I'll then go to my output tab over here, and under output, click this folder icon and choose a file location where you want to save your image sequence, and then click accept. Select a file format of your choice. I'm going to go with PNG. Usually I'd go with OpenEXR with a codec of DWAA lossy, and that will decrease your file size whilst increasing your dynamic range for colour grading and post-production. But for now, I'm just going to choose PNG. I'll set mine to RGB 16-bit, maybe I'll give a compression level of 25%. I'll then go to my render tab up here, and on this frame here with your viewport shading, if you hit Ctrl S, that should save this as a thumbnail for your Blender file. I'm going to hit F12 just to render out a test frame, just to ensure everything's working okay. Okay, that looks pretty good. I might go to a frame where I've got a heavy depth of field, so something around there perhaps. I'll then hit F12 just to render out a test frame. Okay, that's not looking too shabby, but maybe for the final I'll increase the samples just to improve the depth of field here. So I'm going to hit escape, and under my render tab over here, I'm going to set the max samples to 4096. I'll then skip back to frame, let's say 35. I'm going to hit Ctrl S. I'll just go back into solid view. If you wanted to, you could add a solidify modifier onto each of these flaps with perhaps a bevel modifier, and that will give it a bit more realism. I'm not going to do that for this tutorial. Instead, I'm just going to keep it as is. So I'll skip to frame 35. I'm going to go into viewport shading. I'll just select my camera object. I'll then hit Ctrl S to save the project, and then it's simply a case of hitting Ctrl F12, and that will render out your image sequence. Join me on Patreon as a free member, and you'll have access to this file alongside other Blender files from previous tutorials. That's the tutorial in a nutshell. I hope you found this useful. If you did, please click like and subscribe. It really helps my channel. Have a great day, level up, and thanks for watching.